don't you come back no more.
Google computer scientist in the 80s and count how many articles are about women being underrepresented in the tech field. If you do, you'll probably find out that a good portion of the articles are about how women are underrepresented in the computer science field, and how that began in the 1980s and has just gotten worse since. I think this strongly suggests that Google is pushing search results towards a critical theory intersectional bias. You can't even search for 80s computer nerds without Gulag telling you that you should feel guilty because equality of outcome did not exist at some point in history. It's absurd that they're perpetually pushing this nonsense down our throats. Equality of outcome is not possible to begin with, as not all people have the same genetics and epigenetics and experiences as the other 100 billion some odd humans who have existed on this planet at one time or another. Most of the things humans do are complicated enough that there will never be a natural equity or equality of outcome because complexity resists such inane simplicity. Some people are taller or shorter than others. Some people are smarter. Some people work harder. Some people are into things other people are not. That anyone even thinks equity is something we'd want as a society or species, instead of a metric by which you compare unique individuals, speaks to how intensely stupid some people are compared to others. Because that people are different demonstrates and proves that not every outcome will be equal. Assuming that there's some societal or cultural bias to explain the lack of equity, which is the starting point for pretty much all social constructionists, can only be described as intensely stupid, because everyone knows that not all humans are equitable when it comes to their skills, physical form, or any other defining characteristics. Hell, characteristics are a way of classifying how we are distinct from one another, so that by itself demonstrates that there is more than enough evidence that equality of outcome and social equity are impossible. Because you can see that people are not made equal by looking or talking to any of them. We are all equal under the law because natural rights dictate that must be so. But that doesn't mean every aspect of our lives and personalities and biological capabilities are inherently equal. People who use identity politics or progressive stack logic, or any of that post-structuralist leftist horseshit, are not doing it because they actually want equity anyway. That's a red herring. They want to break everything in the world down to a series of dichotomies, of power dominance hierarchies, in order to classify those who have power as oppressors and those who do not as the oppressed. They really don't even want to do this to help the oppressed, though many say that is what they're doing and why they're doing it. No, they want to identify in-groups and out-groups, set up oppressor-oppressed dichotomies, and ride one of those to the top of the pyramid. They figure everyone is oppressing them, and by nature that is how society works anyway, so they band together in order to take power and oppress everyone else before they themselves can be oppressed. So it's about power and control, not equity. When you hear someone using equity or equality to push neo-Marxist nonsense, don't fall for the bullshit, because they're lying to you in order to get power over you. That said, it makes you wonder why tech companies are operating under the canard of equity, and why they're pushing this insipid ideology down everyone's throat. It doesn't appear to be to try to educate, so much as they appear to be inserting this nonsense into everything they do in order to indoctrinate the public and guilt people into supporting equality of outcome arguments. Everything is racist, everything is sexist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out. Case in point. We were tipped off to this by one of our good friends and collaborators. He said he Googled computer scientist in the 80s in order to look for images of nerds in the 1980s. What he got was a bunch of articles about why the number of women pursuing and earning computer science degrees went down so drastically in the 1980s. On Google, of the first 9 search results that were not ads, 4 are about why women were pushed out of the programming industry. So they appear to be pushing intersectionality and critical theory from a gender perspective, the same way Gulag manipulated search results like white man and white woman or American inventors, and getting skewed results pushing a racial bias. In a similar way as to how they manipulated search suggestions and autocomplete queries during the 2016 election. To compare it to other browsers, we searched for the same thing in DuckDuckGo, which we know uses Google servers and searches, they just route it to make it anonymous, Yahoo and Bing. On Bing, we found similar results. 3 out of 10 were about women not being represented in equal distribution in the 1980s. On Yahoo.com, the first 9 results presented 7 that were about women being underrepresented. DuckDuckGo had 2 out of 10 articles that were about intersectionality and gender oppression in the 1980s. Something else worth noting here is consistent across all these searches, is that the searches related to computer scientists in the 1980s category lists 8 options, and 5 of those 8 are all female computer scientists. The articles themselves. All of them are basically carbon copies of one another, showing the same graph detailing women's stats in various fields, the percentage of majors of women in med school, law school, physical sciences, and computer sciences. The graph shows the numbers of women obtaining majors rising in all of the fields steadily until today, except for computer science. Each article attributes the fall to the personal computer coming out in 1984 and being marketed as a toy for boys. Then some anecdote about some woman in the 80s having to be motivated to do math and learn computing by the specific and targeted encouragement of her teacher. It's also curious as to why each of these articles are basically the same thing, about the same thing, showing the same thing, and even including the same anecdotes. But that's a video for another day. Each article also includes some talk about universities trying to reverse this trend, because they're all apparently under the spell of equality of outcome being the only thing that matters. Because McGilt. Never mentioned in any of the articles is that when you smooth out societal gender differences, such as the Scandinavian countries have been trying to do for the past 20 years, where a bunch of studies and surveys about gender equity have been conducted, the notion that equity distribution evens out to population demographics completely falls apart. When researchers smooth out the cultural differences in occupation or schooling based on gender norms, where there are no specific cultural societal throttles telling men that they should be this or women that they should be that, they found that it actually increases the divergence in equity. Even though there are no social pressures in Norway telling men that they should be doctors, or women that they should be nurses, when you allow people to do what they want to do, women chose to be nurses or HR majors in greater proportional numbers than the US, and more women went into STEM. That by itself completely smashes the notion that the patriarchy is causing less women to be in STEM, because freedom of choice increases the divide more than strict cultural gender roles. So as a logical consequence, less women went into computing in the 1980s, partially because computers were marketed to boys, but mostly because women are into different things than boys. The real change in computer science majors among women came less from a marketing decision than it did from the number of people going to get degrees suddenly skyrocketing in the 1980s, and more men were doing so because the personal computer made it possible for more men to catch the spark. Plenty of women did so too, but they did other things as well and in greater proportions, because on average women are not typically as object-oriented as men, and while many more women went to college to study for what they wanted to in general, the number of computer science degrees fell off because, like the boys, they were getting new tools and toys and figuring out what they enjoyed and what they wanted to do with their lives. To attribute this solely to a social throttle via marketing decision is intellectually dishonest and insipidly misleading. Did Gulag and the other search companies artificially put weight on guilt-inducing articles about gender inequality of outcome? If so, do they know that the numbers don't suggest that marketing was really to blame, but freedom of choice, which attracted boys to the field and allowed women to be attracted to other things? Almost certainly, as James Damore told them all about this in his infamous memo. They choose to ignore hard scientific evidence, logic, rationale, and common sense in order to push neo-Marxist dogshit. And people wonder why we call them Gulag, StasiTube, Fastbook, and Twiddler.
Shaboom, shaboom. Yada la 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 la. Shaboom, shaboom. Yada la 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 la. Shaboom, shaboom. Yada la la.